You follow golf at all?
No.
Yeah, I'm recording now.
2 years ago, the winner of the TPC, she has him as a client. She has a lot of baseball players.
That's cool. Very cool.
You know the biggest client now? Female volleyball players. High school kids. Because the biggest scholarships you can get are for female volleyball players in the Ivy League schools. I would never have guessed that.
They look friendly.
They just kind of,
Bears also look friendly.
They don't take water off the river. And not half the Main Street.
They tried to talk my daughter into doing crew, I think, at UConn to get a scholarship. She wanted to do it.
What a great way to go to school free. Relatively free.
No. She works for the women's basketball team, so that's paying for her masters. So that's,
Great for them.
yep.
Yeah, they're devastated. They lost one game in the last 125. Big deal. They play tomorrow, right? Thursday.
Or Wednesday,
What's today?
Tuesday.
Either Wednesday or
It's not,
Thursday.
yeah.
That's down on South Wall Street. That's the fire department that did a few years ago. Oh, I don't know how much. The fire
Want this
department
chair?
did a bunch of roads.
You can-
Oh, yeah, sure.
Emergency, well, I did a chain across there. For the fire department. Thanks. That was the fire department.
A little bit more comfortable.
Changed all that.
Good observation.
We have parts of the trail that we put in up off of Melrose Road that are now.
Oh, yeah, down there? Good walking area.
Ay, ay, ay.
I got no bugs. Just so everyone knows we are live, we're on TV, just make it clear, everybody's on.
Good evening, Terry Ann Hahn, Principal LADA PC Land Planners. I'm a consultant to the town for the Warehouse Point POD planning project. This is a continuation of ongoing discussion, and right now we're in the data gathering and sharing phase. This project is just the beginning of a multi-step process that will be all the way until approximately December of this year, 2019, including 2 sets of public workshops. Since we were here last, we have spent inputs, not just from here, but when we started this, or in earnest in the beginning of November, the end of October, we have been in Warehouse Point almost every week, in some cases twice a week, to look at and take photos of the way stormwater is acting in Warehouse Point. So what we're really trying to do today is sort of take those things that you know, the things that you're familiar with, the what it looks like, and match it with plans and data that's available out there. So try to get elevation. So when you look out along South Water Street and you see the Connecticut River, you can say, all right, if I see this is at elevation so-and-so, and I can anticipate that it's going to go this high, so that it matches the maps that we've been producing. So it's really trying to get the things that you know and that you see tied into the data that's being generated as part of this report. Okay? So what we're doing, let's see. Okay. And when we were here last, we had just hot off the press, there had been a very draft watershed map for Warehouse Point put together. And the way Warehouse Point works is that the stuff at the top, the Connecticut River is at the top, so north is facing this way for pretty much all the maps. And the dash line is Enfield here, the town line. And that the watershed includes parts of Warehouse Point all the way to 91 and across 91, all the way down to the bridge crossing of 91. The way stormwater works is that the watershed, the runoff within the watershed goes either one of two directions. Goes directly to the river, or before it comes back into the crinkle that's on the other side or to the east of Main Street here, this area right through here, flows from north to south, crosses underneath 91 and discharges at the, just between 91 and that little area that looks like a boat ramp, an emergency exit. And that's the discharge. And that is what it looks like on paper, okay? Which makes sense to me because, you know, we're plan people, but for the most part, it doesn't make any sense to anybody else. So what we have been doing is looking at what this really means, and we're taking the maps and what you see and sort of connecting the dots.
Terry, can I just ask, is
Yeah.
that crinkle also known as the blue ditch?
Okay, it's funny you should say that, because one of the things that comes up is everyone talks about the blue ditch. So the question was, we went into our maps and we said, well, where exactly is the blue ditch? You know, where does that come into play? Well, it comes into play in two places. It's identified the confluence of the blue ditch, which is over here, the discharge point, is identified in the FEMA maps, but it's also identified in some of the other old soil maps as the blue ditch. So the question is, where exactly is the blue ditch? Okay. How do you define it? These are the floodplain soils and wetland soils from the current soil maps, but this is what really is the blue ditch, okay? And what it is the area, although it doesn't, from Bridge Street and the discharge point from the north, daylights, goes underneath Holcomb, goes underneath, or Spring, underneath Holcomb, heads towards Main Street, goes underneath Main Street, goes in the back of the athletic fields, the back of the wastewater treatment plant, curls around 91, discharges across 91 and out. But it has another branch. The southern branch includes all the land that basically goes to Route 5 and down in this area over here. The southern branch is not the area that we're looking at all, okay, just so that you know. We're basically looking at just the northern branch and how it relates to Warehouse Point. Because this area here is all outside of technically what we're calling Warehouse Point. The town engineer is currently in the process of doing a hydraulic analysis of the actual pipe, the 72-inch pipe, to see whether or not that should be bigger or smaller. What we're focusing on is what happens to the stormwater in this area here, and what does that mean long-term for development? So if we add impervious surface, what does it mean? So what we're doing now is looking at what the blue ditch actually looks like, what does it feel like, what do you see in a storm. We're taking storm information with river levels and photographs. So we have a whole series of storm events where I know what the rain event was. I know how long it takes to go from peak runoff to when the river starts to kick up. So we start to get some visualizations. In general, with a storm event, it's about anywhere from a minimum of 6 to 12 hours to 24 to 48 hours difference between when the runoff comes through Warehouse Point to when the river comes up. It's a big lag. So you have the stormwater runoff through Warehouse Point, coming through the blue ditch, discharging, getting out of here, and then the next thing that happens is the river rises and the water backs up. So it's not directly related to Warehouse Point runoff. So what does the blue ditch really look like? Okay? This is the beginning, or what we're considering the beginning. This is the daylighting from the north. It comes from Pleasant through a wetland area in the back of Geisler's. There's a pipe at Geisler's, gets picked up underneath, goes through Geisler's parking lot, gets storm drainage from Bridge Street and Gardner, all get picked in by pipe, and then it eventually discharges into this ditch here. This ditch is the general elevation, which would be the land elevation rather than where the water channel is here, is at approximately 35 feet high, okay, when you look at the point. Okay. And 35 feet high is just, keep that in the back of your mind, is what's considered the flood elevation. So one of the things that we looked at, that picture was taken on January 5th. There was a 1.03 inch storm event, and your question is, well, how do I know this? One of the things that we use is NOAA produces a summary running totals of the rain event at Bradley. That's the closest that we can get, although there are differences from one place to the next, because Bradley can get 2 inches and we can get 3/4 of an inch on the other area. But this is the one that we use as official information. So on January 5th, there was a rain event of 1.03 inches, which was a pretty good one. We were on site right in the middle, right here. Started slow, worked its way up, and really peaked, because there was an additional ½ an inch that came between noontime and 5 o'clock. And so that's what we're going to see in some of those pictures. Yes?
That 35-foot elevation,
Yep.
is that the actual elevation of the land, or is that the elevation difference between the Connecticut River and the land?
No, the actual elevation of the land.
Okay, what's the elevation between the normal river height
Yep.
and that point?
I'll get that, because one of the problems that we were having was to try and set a river elevation, okay? Because I have the topography. The topography ends at about 12. But that's not really what happens here, and you'll see, because one of the difficulties that we're trying to get all the data so that it matches, so that we get the numbers right. So yes, this is kind of what we've been trying to come up with. All right, so this was Bridge Street, and that's at approximately elevation of 35. It goes down, it's fairly flat. There's a defined channel that the highway department cleaned out. That's the one that you saw there. And then it kind of broadens out. Okay? And this is the land that was formerly application for Lowe's here. Okay? And it sort of broadens out and heads towards Spring Street at about an elevation between 35 and 34. So it's relatively flat. Okay? So when it goes across, there's a culvert at Spring Street. It drops down a little bit more, and by the time it gets to the other side of Holcomb Street, it's not down at about 32. So we've had about a 3-foot change of grade. So here you can see this is the Spring Street crossing. It's not defined. It's really just a wetland corridor that kind of water oozes its way down. Nice level spreader. Eventually hits, there's some maintenance that needs to happen here too, but it eventually hits a pipe, comes underneath Spring Street, crosses through a couple of backyards. This is Holcomb, and then it continues. You can see again, there's a little bit of a stream channel, but not very much. Goes through the fields, and that heads towards Main Street. Okay. That's what it looks like. Question? Okay.
This looks very soggy.
It is very soggy. It is soggy. Okay. So it then travels from Holcomb to Main Street, approximately, we lose another 3 feet coming down the hill. So on one side, it's about 30, elevation of 30. On the other side, the pipe drops. It's about an elevation of 28 plus or minus. And that's when it hits the back end of the athletic fields, and the ground continues to go down. The athletic fields gives us a pretty good idea of what happens here. And this is, as you're coming, this is Main Street again. So the pipe discharged here, it kind of winds its way through. There's a nice stream corridor. Somewhere around this area here for the regular storms, the 1-inch storms that we keep getting, it actually fills up the whole stream and it blows out into the athletic fields. So the water that you see pooling in this area here is actually because the stream bank, it jumps its bank and then travels through, fills this up, and eventually gets down into this area and drops down to an elevation of about 20. And that's the main flood area behind the wastewater treatment plant.
So if they dredged that, they would stop the flooding. I'm surprised all these years that nobody's, blocked that ditch any way, shape, or form?
It's an interesting question. The
It's all
problem
private property.
It is private property, and not only that, but this is one part of the question. The other part is when it backs up.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's the complicated question. So from here, the stream has a very defined channel. It has first tier flood elevations, and it has then a bank full condition, and it fills up back there behind the wastewater treatment plant pretty much every storm. And just so you understand the terms that we use, when you look at a stream, the place where there's usually always water is what's known as a channel. That's the main water place. When you'll see on a channel there's like plateaus in the wetlands where you know that those are the first, what we call first tier flood areas. Once it hits the main area, gets out of here, it jumps the channel bank, and then once it hits this first level here for the major flood section, that's what's known as a bank full condition. And that bank full condition is what's known as that's the storage capacity for the storm. There's then an additional flood area that is the hydrologic flood plain under the larger storm events. Okay? And that's usually reflected. You can see it topographically, it plateaus, goes up again, plateaus. Each one of those plateaus represents a floodplain elevation. So here, we're right behind, we're in the athletic fields. You can see a stream bank, or the stream channel itself here, and then you can see the initial flood limits where it jumps its bank up here and floods this way until it goes back into the stream bank. So on the regular storms, this was back in November. This was about a 1-inch rain event also. The runoff from Warehouse Point came in, got to a bank full condition, flooded a little bit, and then receded fairly quickly. Okay, it's a fairly quick start to end, or what they call time of concentration, from when the rain comes to when it flows. The rain event it lingers. This one in November 4th, this was very interesting because this was the third of a series of 1-inch rainfalls that had occurred a couple of days apart from one another. So the river was very high. So in this particular case, right in the middle where I showed that second line on the map, what we actually have here is a backwater condition. There's no flow. There was flow coming from the north up until approximately the 20 or 22-foot contour because the pipe further downstream was actually underwater and the water from the river was actually coming back this way. So it was stuck. There was no forward movement. The only thing I missed in these pictures, I was probably about 3, 4, 5, 6 hours too late to actually watch the water come backwards. I'm looking for that. I want that picture. I want to be able to say I saw that. So this is a different day. Going back to the stream bank, this was a low flow condition at the beginning of December. And just so that we can relate it to the pictures, this is obviously the channel with a stream bed on the bottom. You can see there's a plateau here, which is the first tier flood area. And then somewhere from the top of this bank to somewhere over here would be what's called the bank full elevation. And if I relate that to the topo maps that we're using, that's an elevation of either 20 or 22, depending on where you are in that wetland itself.
We have seen that condition many
We have.
times.
Well, and just right at Christmas, we saw that condition. Yes, on a regular basis. So continuing south towards the discharge, there's a culvert under 91 that goes to a head wall where there's actually 2 pipes, one which comes from 91, one which comes from the wastewater treatment plant. Then it opens up into a big stream corridor, some coming this way and some coming from our direction, and then goes underneath South Water Street and discharges into the Connecticut River. Here you see the stream channel is full on January 5th. This was another one of those 1-inch rain events. In this particular case, the river was actually quite low, so you could see the discharge of the silty water here right into the clean water of the Connecticut River, right at the water's edge. It was easy to see. So this did not experience a bank full condition or a backwater condition yet on January 5th. The low flow, you can see there's the pipe with the secondary pipe from 91 coming from the wastewater treatment plant.
Which pipe is coming from the treatment plant? The big or the small one?
The big one. The big one. The small ones come from 91. So that's the head wall, again coming from the wastewater treatment plant, and this is the 72-inch pipe at the Connecticut River.
When you say coming from the wastewater treatment plant,
I just use that as direction, hang on.
yeah, so is that part of the blue just flowing around it? It's not actually coming from it, or is it coming from it?
Through. Yeah, the blue ditch
Yeah.
comes all the way through here, or wraps around here, goes underneath the pipe this way, and then goes this way. The other half of the blue ditch is all in this area over here.
How
But
far,
there's, I'm sorry,
how far back does that 6-foot pipe go? Does it go
Just-
under the highway?
just to here, yeah, goes from here to here. The 72-inch pipe goes from South Water Street out to the river.
Oh, it just picks up both blue ditches and
Correct. Correct.
Discharge.
Right. So the culvert here, this is at approximately an elevation of 18 here, plus or minus. But this, best that I can tell, is at an elevation of approximately between 9 and 10 feet. So 9 and 10 feet, 10 to 12, 9 to 10 feet is our river elevation.
So the picture on the right is discharging into the Connecticut River.
Correct. Correct. This is the only time when we were able to access this since November, was there was a brief low flow moment where we were able to actually access it safely. It's a little tricky.
Deal above water.
You mean the water level?
I'm sorry.
Is above the pipe. When it backwaters, that's what happens. The water level gets higher than the pipe.
Does the 9-foot elevation change from one end of the pipe to the other end of the pipe? So one end is 18, one end is 9?
12 and 3 feet. 12. Yeah, so it depends on what number we use, 14 or 12 and 12 and 10. Okay, because it's getting it from 2 different directions. So I would say what I've decided is that this is 12, 13, something like that, and that the discharge pipe comes 9 or 10. So I'm getting data from 2 different sources, explaining why I have confusion. But I'm starting to make decisions based on the topo map so that we can start to get something in our heads. All right, so this was November 4th. This is when we had the backwater condition. This is the bank full flooded condition that you had previously seen here, where you can't find that channel anymore. It's basically completely covered. And you start to be able to identify what the river elevation is by what the elevation is up along those posts on that access point. So again, just looking at those elevations,
So
we can say, I'm sorry?
is the access point a boat launch?
I'm calling it a boat launch for, it is an emergency access ramp. It's
for the-
not formal, it's not a boat ramp.
It's for the
Okay.
fire department.
Yeah.
Okay, because I've seen people fishing there, but I've never seen
Yeah.
people putting
No, it's not
boats
really
in.
suitable, it's not paved or anything, it's strictly emergency access. So if we go down to the river level, at this point, the lowest element, you can see there's actually a sand beach over here. You can see the normal river level would be somewhere up here. Your first tier flood would be somewhere up here. And then it starts going up. On December 23rd, the water was approximately 4 feet or so below the elevation of South Water Street. South Water Street at that point is an elevation of between 18 and 20. I'm sorry, between 28 and 30. So it's approximately 4 to 6 feet. So I am using for this one, as the river was at approximately 20 to 22 feet in elevation. Does that make sense? Everybody follow along?
There's no markings on the bridge pier regarding...
No. There's no markings on the bridge here. And I keep taking pictures of the bridge to see if it'll linger in some fashion. But I'm far enough away that there's nothing really distinctive about the concrete.
You don't have a canoe?
Can't see any water lines.
Yeah. Spray paint, you can spray paint.
You can see the water lines don't last long enough. They evaporate too quick. So on December 13th, there was no storm event. What I'm trying to remedy is the topography that we're using, and what's known, there's a river gauge, which is provided up a little bit further upstream at Thompsonville. And this has been fairly consistent with my understanding and the visuals that we've been having. So on December 23rd, according to this river gauge, it was 15.3 feet above the stream bed, is the way that they do it. And then on December 13th, it was 9.5. The difficulty is that the stream bank, or the stream bed in Thompsonville is about 4 feet higher than it is according to the USGS here. So we have a slight differential. So I'm saying it's about 3 foot difference, plus or minus. So based on the gauge plus 3, that would be about 12.5 feet. Our topography is showing between 10 and 12 feet. So we're in the correct general range. And in December, the topo would say that it was between elevation 20 and 22. It hit against the Connecticut River, and the gauge says 15.3 with the river bottom above, so it was a little off. It was just a little bit off. So it gives us a good idea of the differential, but it's not a direct apples to apples measure. So I'm trying to relate it more to our topography because that's what the flood elevations are based on. Just to give you an idea of what this meant, in December you can see the stream bank, okay? You can see that it's a good 10 to 12 feet below the sort of standing grass area. You can see a fairly consistent edge of the flood. You see a secondary line here where the water tends to go on a regular basis. And sure enough, on December 23rd, it was a 2+ inch rain event. And this is, depending on where you're at elevation 20 or 22 along that stream bed. So that whole, the water was here, up at this level here, at that point.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
Do you have measurements of the peak river level maybe over the last 30 years or something? So like you were saying, it gets to be 20 feet. And
Yep.
has it ever been 40 feet?
Well, it's a good question. It's quite possible. I can find that information out. What I'm going by at the moment is this rain gauge, because that's not the river gauge, which is the closest element. And what they use is this 15 is considered the flood elevation. Anything above this 15, which quite honestly equates to probably 20 on our topo maps, 19, something like that. Anything above that is considered flooded. It's in flood stage. Historically, obviously, it has gone higher than that. I can actually do, I think I can do a year at a time off of this gauge, but right now it's subject to the federal down, and so I'm trying to pull information off of this.
You can't
while I
download
still-
data or anything.
I know that in the 80s, that whole South Water Street was flooded.
Yeah.
Friends of mine lived on that, and it was flooded.
I remember in the
They closed the
50s,
remember
bridge
that
out. They
too.
closed the bridge in the 80s.
I remember in the 50s, it was
houses.
pretty bad.
Yeah.
80, 81, 82, 83, somewhere in that area.
Terry, how much does our spring thaw relate to as far as like a rain event? You know, so when we get our normal spring thaw, is that equivalent to a 3-inch rainfall or?
Well, I don't have, that's my next series of data that I'm gathering, because we'll be able to actually have on-site observation through the spring, so that will be part of what we have for the project, but there's so many variables.
Yeah, right now the snowpack, there is none.
Right, and it's not just
How
our
fast
snowpack.
it-
Right,
but
it's
Vermont
all the way up,
and
all the way up to
snowpack.
Canada, right.
And then what happens? I mean, certainly
Wow.
there was a good, I would say 15 to 20 years where we had a 3-inch rain event in March while there was still 12 inches of rain, snow and the ground was frozen. And by the time that rain event came, the frost was out of the ground, there was no snow, and and that happened every year for a good 15 years straight, from about, I'd say, 85-ish to almost 2000.
We almost run every year at some point that South Water Street is closed.
And the real question is, South Water Street, the elevation of South Water Street sits pretty much at 28 to 30. Pretty much all the way from the discharge up to where it raises up a little bit at School Street, where it starts to be a little bit higher there. So the question is, how does that relate to, for it to be underwater, that would be maybe 30, 32. The flood elevation, which is slightly different, is at 35. That's the 100-year flood elevation. So that's another 5 feet above what you were typically looking at. That's something that you need to look at long-term in those particular areas. Okay. So anyway, one of the fun things is, this is a nice visual. It's easy to drive by and equate numbers to it in this area. When you can't see the water, then the water is at, let's say, 10. Up here on the third post, okay, that one's another, that's 10 to 12 feet higher. Okay. So that's kind of a quick visual when you're driving by and wondering where you're at. So where we're at next, like I said, we've been documenting these. We're putting together the sheets that just show all the actual specific photos with all the data. So I've got those together. The next thing that we're doing is just getting the technical drainage report finished and looking at how this data then relates to flood elements. And then the next step will be, what does this mean for land use? That's really sort of where we're at, step by step.
One question, do you have good rain gear?
I have superb rain gear, considering how much time I spend out in the rain. Yes, yes. My camera, on the other hand, is not that excited about the concept. Anybody have any other questions?
Very informational, thank you.
From a hydrology point of view, is it a good thing we had a lot of rain within the last month or so for us to be able to document?
I think it's very helpful and very convenient, the amount of rain that has been happening this year, because you know, I mean, there are years where it never hits that crest. So we could all look at this, say, no, that's not real. You don't know what you're talking about. We don't have to worry about it. That's, you know, it's going to have an impact. So that's, I think it's reminds us kind of why we're doing this.
Have you taken into consider climate change?
Well, you have to, one of the things that happened is in 2017, I think it was, the flood elevations here all changed. They all added a foot, all the way up of each one of these flood lines. The AM, the AL over here, they each added an extra foot. So those flood elevations went from 34 to 35 and 36. So that's one of the consequences. And I'm not sure that that was more, no one's talking about sea level change within that, but the increased number of 1-inch rain events that we're getting. Because, I mean, pretty much every rain event that we had this year was 1 inch or more. A half-inch feels like nothing now.
Now, the blue areas on this map,
Yep,
does that signify a 10-year flood, a 20-year flood, a 50-year flood?
that's what was traditionally called the 100-year flood. And that's the 10%. That is basically elevation through time. I don't know what.
So, Terry, as we move forward in this process, you indicated there's going to be a series of public meetings, and you said perhaps 2?
There'd be 2 sets,
Okay.
an initial one and then recommendations.
How much of this information that we're talking about tonight can actually be shown to the public?
Well, I think some of this, part of it, as we have done in the past, we show you guys a little bit more information than we do sort of the general public, but we use this as a mechanism in which to sort of get reactions and see what's going to work and what doesn't work. People are used to seeing things with their eye. They know what they know, and this gives us a presentation in this way, starts to set up a correlation between what you know and how the maps work, and then what the data works. So some version of this will be incorporated into that initial presentation for education purposes.
I'm just concerned about getting a little too technical,
Yes.
losing people in the public.
Risk, and that's one of the things that we're generally concerned about. We're trying to get it so that we're getting the graphics so that it makes sense to people without having to worry about whether or not it's so-and-so formula and
Okay.
that sort of information.
Yeah.
2 questions. Is this just to map out where things are going, or trying to find a solution to having less flooding in?
Well, I think the two things. We haven't ruled out solutions to have less flooding, but we are separating out stormwater generated by Warehouse Point from things that are related to the Connecticut River. We can't really solve the Connecticut River issue. That it's too big of a watershed. That's not. However, we have to be aware of it. Your regulations already take that into consideration, and there's some new building code recommendations as to what that might mean. There may be things, for example, for future development that are related to stormwater as to whether or not the increased impervious surface and development in Warehouse Point, how that should be handled. Okay? That's how it would be related. But can I stop it from doing what it's doing? No, not particularly. I'd love to be able to say it could, but unless, we can.
Not without a really big dredge.
Well, I'm thinking Vermont.
That's like,
I'm thinking Vermont.
So we're looking for adaptation.
We're looking for adaptation. And just the understanding where we really can put additional development without causing, nothing that we're going to do here causes more flooding, theoretically, because the runoff is all gone before that actually happens. So it's 2 separate activities. The more, depending on what you're doing, though, you don't want to be unsensitive. Obviously, on each one of these storms, the runoff from Warehouse Point is 6 to 12 to 18 to 24 hours ahead of whatever's happening on the Connecticut River. If you're doing something so that that peak and that discharge elongates and gets closer and closer to when the river comes, that's a problem.
Right, it's equating to like looking to see if your PLTW can handle a new development. We're looking to see if our stormwater system can handle a new development.
Correct.
Well, that's like when the big box stores are gonna come in, we're gonna make them fix all around the blue dish.
Yep.
We're gonna fix all that.
Yeah, and in
Then
that
they get bigger.
well, and also some of the things we've talked were in that is detention basins and some other things. And in reality, we might not want detention basins happening here. We just might want water quality and
Better flow,
transport.
yeah.
But I'm not prepared to make that decision at this time. We'll come to that conclusion.
Are you looking at water tables also in this? So I mean, is there?
That really hasn't come up. The soils don't seem to indicate, you have wet spots in the back of these houses in that zone, but that's all part of the flood zone.
Well, I mean,
anyway.
because I'm thinking of, use of dry wells, things like that,
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should mention that. In addition to hanging out and checking out the storms, we've been doing all of the follow-up information to figure out how the pipe systems all work and where we have dry wells and where we don't. In some of these cases, dry well is a more modern choice, and most of where it really just has an open bottom catch basin. So the water's coming in and it's just, as far as I know, nobody's had any complaints that that system isn't working. So we're not getting a groundwater increase, and we're not being like Venice. We're not getting bubbles, as far as I know. However, the elevation 35 is up there. So up here, you're not in that zone.
Have you been collaborating with Lenny as appropriate?
Yep, he provided us with a series of maps. We are sending this as a draft back to him to see if there's anything that we missed. We've been adding the private information on the site plans that Matt and the planning department gave us, so that those are all added as well, and just getting a much better idea. And this map ultimately is useful for Lenny as part of his MS4 compliance. So he'll be able to use that as well, because he doesn't have a documented map. He knows everything, but technically you need a map.
Is there someone or some government agency that maps the Connecticut River and how much flow goes into it and like the number of gallons it gets dumped out and all that type of thing?
That's not in the way that you need. The DEP, the DEEP, it has issues and concerns, and they're the ones who always monitor the stormwater discharge. But really, what would come into play here would probably more likely be flood storage issues. So for example, we would take this field and decide that, oh, let's fill it up so it's higher than the elevation. That would take a huge amount of flood storage within this floodplain, and that becomes a federal permit. That's usually not allowed. Start taking away flood storage, and that's just going to cause some problems
Somewhere else, yeah.
When the government's working.
This week we can do
Anyone have any other comments, questions?
Put in a lot of hours.
Great job.
I'm impressed. Yeah.
Proud of
A lot to it.
Yeah. It seems like it goes slow, but you have to spend the
There's a
time in.
methodical path that I
Yeah.
can see you're following, right?
Yep, and you want to, you get in front of the public has seen things, okay? Yes.
I remember
True.
when.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would like to be able to say, okay, well, I'm going to take that information, document it, and say, okay, when that happened, I can tell you it was elevation such and such. So we're just trying to get all those data points and relate them to something specific, so that we all have common understanding and knowledge.
Okay, let's suppose two scenarios in the future. You said earlier that one of the big problems is getting the water out of the way faster. But that's going to mean that we create more of a pitch somewhere.
Well, either that, or, the issue
Or put in
is,
a culvert, or...
you could open up the culverts, okay, so that there's more capacity to come through where the pinch points are. But really, the question is, when you have new development and new impervious surface, the question is, do you detain so that the peak is slowed down, or because you just want to get it out of there, do you do little water quality improvements and you just keep letting it go?
But then you still have the problem of the river rising, and it's going to back up the culvert. So are we faced with living with what we have, or would a culvert or something along those ideas to get rid of the water faster give us more usable land?
I don't have the answer to that at this time. That's what the calculations show. So that's where we will be heading with the existing calculations and the proposed calculations. So those are waiting. Right now they're finishing up the existing calculations, but we'll get a better idea of which way to go. I don't want to jump to any conclusions until I've got the science.
I think Ruben said earlier, I think it's managing what we have and making informed decisions about potential development in the future.
Right, yeah.
I also wonder if there is a way to incent the people who have the property in the flood zone on South Water Street to make improvements to reduce their flooding.
Well, there are, it's not their flooding, it's the impact of the flood on their property.
Yes.
Okay. And there are opportunities and options to do that, that is probably going to be part of the recommendations. Some of that element is already in your floodplain regulations. So for new construction.
For new construction, but what do you do to help the people who have an existing house that their basement floods?
Yeah, no, that's in this particular case, that's a slightly different problem. What we're talking about is that the general water elevation is going to be in the first floor. Their basement, I think everybody's written off basements for the most part. Insurance doesn't even cover what's in your basement.
Yes, to me, it's like, can you elevate the house
Well, and
on
that's-
stilts?
Right, and that
basically.
is one of the standard practices, that you take the finished floor elevation and you put it a foot above flood elevation.
Yep.
One of the things that we'll look at when we start to get to the recommendations part is, what does that actually look like on South Water Street? Is that something that you really want to do? Because don't forget, elevation South Water Street is 30. You would need to get the first floor at 35 or 36. And what does that really look like?
Well, you start to see it, I'll say, in beach communities.
correct.
The beach homes are all, the first floor you park under the house,
Yeah.
basically.
And you give it away, basically, if it floods.
Yes,
Yes.
you put the
Here's.
Yep.
flow doors and the water just flows through the downstairs.
That's correct. But, and there was some money in Connecticut about 6 or 7 years ago, and there may still be some resiliency money through some of the OPM that would allow for a program such as that.
So I see how you get, when it's new construction, it does it to happen. But I don't see how you get at the existing homes.
Well, it's funny, I mean, you guys were looking at the whole open space element. There may be certain parts that, would make more sense to just make an offer and move on. But again, I'm not prepared to make those recommendations at the moment. Those are the kinds of discussions that we would need to have as we get toward, moving towards this.
Anything else for Terry?
Thank you, very good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
When do you expect to visit us again? Next month? Or, okay.
Yeah, we'll keep going. Okay. Yeah.
Do you want to be before or after? Do you think that-
I am not teaching this semester, so I have no conflicts.
Okay.
They forgot to put my class on the roster.
You're like a government employee, you're furloughed?
It's a temporarily furloughed, yes.
Well, maybe it's tended to pick up some
okay.
new clients.
It's all right. More time in the rain.
Yeah, right.
Good job. She did a good job.
This is for you.
Top shelf.
Did you get one of these?
I have an electronic version.
Yeah, this is, okay. Yes, you did. Totally different.
I got that. All right. Okay. Any correspondence? Nothing?
No.
Anything under our business meeting you want to talk about?
I have one question. It's just about, so there's a specific regulation. There's a gentleman that owns a property at 155 Main Street, over there in Broadbrook, and there are apartments, I guess, that are overhead, and he has a commercial business below.
Okay.
And
Like a mixed use?
well, yeah, and I had this.
Does he have a legal apartment overhead that's for mixed use, or does he have a legal apartment? Is it legal from?
So I'm taking a look at, we have a regulation that I believe was, I don't know what it was written for, and I just wanted to get a little bit of a history on it if people, and I need to find it. So that's that's the thing, is I had it before.
Is it the grocery store right there?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
That's, that apartment's above there forever.
yeah,
Where's that?
It's the store, the little store, but it's like 3 apartments above there.
yeah, yeah, so that's the place. And, okay, so it's part of the permitted uses in business and industrial district. And I have a question on, a note in there that just says residential units may be permitted above the first story and provided the units are not exposed as part of the main facade below the first story of the commercial buildings. Those units below the first story must be limited to studio apartments not to exceed 900 square feet in area. All residential units in commercial buildings require a special use permit and have to meet a couple of requirements. Where did that come from? I'm just curious.
I believe that was rewritten when we allowed, those apartments below, I'm thinking about,
Pasco's?
not past, Main Street Grill.
Okay,
It was revamped at that time.
Right down here in the center
Yes.
of town.
Yes.
Yeah, where Main Street goes,
Yes.
apartments underneath the Main Street go.
all right.
What does,
Because the elevation, we were on the back
what
side.
what does the original file card that, property say? Is it,
I haven't,
that's where he's gonna start,
yeah.
number 1. You don't know if those, or whatever.
Matt, what's the question? Regarding what regulations apply to a particular condition?
Yeah, so I just wanted that background too. The property owner just came to me and wanted to kind of go over some of his options, and so I just wanted to, I mean, I looked through the regulations, I saw that, and yeah. It was more of just a general question.
Okay.
Plans on doing something with the apartments
He,
upstairs.
he would like to, yeah,
But first he wants to find out they're legal.
pretty much,
Yeah.
yeah. Exactly. So,
Anything else?
that's all I got.
Ruben, do you want to say anything? And this is your first meeting. I'm sure you've had other commission member meetings for some of the other boards that you've...
Motion to adjourn.
That
It's been a pleasure to, just looking forward to, talking to each of you guys and learning more about the town and the possibilities. I see a lot of opportunity, I see a lot of good things coming from folks at the table, and me just putting a little bit of, what I know about planning in other places. Just looking forward to it, making it happen. So thank you for having me tonight, and I'll see you guys next month.
And you're welcome to show up every time.
I'll do my best.
Welcome aboard. I'm sure that you, Matt, and the rest of the team will be terrific additions to the town.
We're doing a great job already, so, we just need to show it up.
Now Matt can do some of the zoning enforcement issues.
So I heard. So I heard.
And as soon as you hire someone else, which you're going to, I'm sure.
We'll see. All right.
Is there anything else? If not, anyone want make a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?